Have you ever found yourself scrolling through YouTube at 2 a.m. looking for something to help you drift off to sleep, only to stumble upon a 40-minute video about the hidden connections between Family Guy episodes? Well, you're not alone, and today we're diving deep into the surprisingly intricate world of Family Guy lore that has somehow become the internet's favorite bedtime story. From the mysterious timeline inconsistencies that have puzzled fans for decades, to the dark theories that lurk beneath Seth MacFarlane's seemingly random humor, we're about to explore why this animated sitcom has developed one of the most dedicated and analytical fan bases in television history. Picture this. It's Sunday night, you've got work tomorrow, but instead of getting some rest, you find yourself 3 hours into a rabbit hole about whether Stewie Griffin can actually time travel or if it's all in his imagination. Sound familiar? The phenomenon of Family Guy lore videos has taken over late-night YouTube, creating an entire subgenre of content that combines nostalgic comfort with mind-bending analysis. These aren't just random observations either. We're talking about carefully crafted theories that connect episodes from different seasons, analyze character development arcs that span decades, and uncover Easter eggs that the writers probably forgot they even included. Let's start with the foundation of Family Guy lore, the Griffin family timeline. Now, you might think that a show about a talking baby and a dog with a novel would be pretty straightforward, but you'd be wrong. The series has been on the air since 1999, with that infamous cancellation and resurrection period, and during that time, the characters have somehow managed to travel through time, and exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Peter Griffin has held dozens of jobs, died multiple times, and somehow always returns to his position at the brewery as if nothing happened. This isn't lazy writing. It's actually part of a larger narrative structure that treats continuity more like a suggestion than a rule. The real complexity begins when you start tracking the relationships between characters across seasons. Take Cleveland Brown, for example. He starts as Peter's neighbor and best friend, moves away to star in his own spin-off show, then returns as if nothing happened. But here's where it gets interesting. Eagle-eyed fans have noticed subtle changes in his personality and relationships that suggest the Cleveland who returned isn't quite the same person who left. This has led to theories about parallel dimensions, simulation theory, and even the possibility that the entire series takes place in some kind of purgatory where characters are doomed to repeat similar scenarios with slight variations. Speaking of characters who've changed, let's talk about Brian Griffin, arguably the most complex character in the Family Guy universe. Brian started as the voice of reason, the intellectual counterpoint to the family's chaos. But over the seasons, he's evolved into something much darker and more complicated. He's struggled with alcoholism, had relationships with human women that border on the inappropriate, and occasionally displays knowledge and abilities that seem impossible for a dog. Some fans theorize that Brian isn't actually a dog at all, but rather a human who's been transformed or cursed, which would explain his human-level intelligence, his ability to drive, and his complex emotional relationships. The Stewie Griffin timeline represents perhaps the most intricate piece of Family Guy lore. Early seasons presented Stewie as an evil genius baby bent on world domination and matricide. His sophisticated vocabulary, advanced inventions, and time travel capabilities made him seem almost supernatural. However, as the series progressed, these elements became more subdued, leading to the popular theory that we're watching Stewie's intelligence and abilities fade as he becomes a more typical child. This regression theory suggests that baby genius abilities are temporary and that Stewie is slowly becoming a normal kid, which explains why his elaborate schemes become less frequent and his vocabulary becomes more age-appropriate. But here's where things get really interesting. The time travel episodes. Stewie's time machine has been used multiple times throughout the series, creating alternate timelines and paradoxes that have never been fully resolved. In some episodes, characters retain memories of time travel adventures, while in others, they seem to forget entirely. This inconsistency isn't accidental. It's actually evidence of a multiverse theory that suggests every major character change or continuity error is actually evidence of timeline splits and reality alterations. The show's approach to death and resurrection adds another layer to the lore. Characters die and come back to life regularly, sometimes within the same episode, sometimes across seasons. Peter has been crushed, exploded, and dismembered, only to appear perfectly fine in the next scene. Brian was famously killed off and replaced, only to be brought back through time travel. These deaths aren't treated as permanent consequences, but rather as temporary inconveniences, suggesting that the Family Guy universe operates under different rules than our reality. Let's delve into the recurring background characters who form the backbone of Quahog society. Characters like Herbert, the elderly neighbor, the greased-up deaf guy, and the various news anchors create a sense of continuity that makes Quahog feel like a real place with its own culture and history. These characters often appear in the background of unrelated scenes, creating a web of interconnected stories that reward observant viewers. Some fans have mapped out the social connections between these background characters, creating elaborate family trees and relationship charts that rival those of epic fantasy novels. The show's treatment of pop culture references creates another fascinating aspect of its lore. Family Guy is famous for its cutaway gags that reference everything from 1,980 seconds movies to obscure historical events. But these references aren't random. They often connect to overarching themes and character development. Peter's obsession with 1,980 seconds culture reflects his refusal to grow up and accept adult responsibilities. Stewie's references to Broadway musicals and classic literature hint at his sophisticated nature and possibly his future sexuality. These cultural touchstones create a shared language that binds the characters together while also dating the episodes in specific time periods. The geography of Quahog itself tells a story. The town layout has changed dramatically over the years, with new businesses appearing and disappearing, neighborhoods shifting, and landmarks moving around. This geographic inconsistency has led some fans to theorize that Quahog exists in a state of constant flux, possibly as a reflection of the characters' unstable mental states, or as evidence that the entire series takes place in some kind of dream or simulation. Religious and philosophical themes run deeper through Family Guy than most casual viewers realize. Peter's Catholic upbringing clashes with his hedonistic lifestyle, creating internal conflicts that occasionally surface in episodes dealing with morality and consequences. Lois's Protestant background and her complex relationship with her wealthy parents add layers of class and religious commentary that inform her character development. These spiritual elements aren't always played for laughs. They sometimes provide genuine insight into the character's motivations and fears. The show's handling of mental health issues, while often controversial, creates another dimension of character analysis. Peter's impulsive behavior and lack of consequences could be seen as symptoms of various psychological conditions. Meg's depression and social isolation are treated both as punchlines and as genuine character traits that affect her relationships and life choices. Chris's awkwardness and social difficulties hint at developmental issues that are never directly addressed, but inform his character arc. Family Guy's relationship with its own cancellation and resurrection has become part of its mythology. The show was canceled after 3 seasons, then brought back due to strong DVD sales and Adult Swim reruns. This real-world history has been incorporated into the show's narrative, with characters occasionally breaking the fourth wall to reference their own cancellation. This metatextual approach creates a unique relationship between the show and its audience, acknowledging that both the characters and viewers are aware they're participating in a constructed narrative. The evolution of the show's animation style tells its own story. Early seasons featured simpler character designs and more limited animation, while later seasons showcase increasingly sophisticated visual techniques and more detailed character expressions. This technical progression mirrors the character's emotional development and the show's growing complexity. Fans have created detailed comparisons showing how character designs have evolved, often using these changes to support theories about character development and timeline alterations. The voice acting performances add another layer of lore analysis. Seth MacFarlane voices multiple main characters, and subtle changes in his vocal performances over the years have been interpreted as character development cues. Peter's voice has become more exaggerated and childish, supporting theories about his regression into immaturity. Stewie's voice has become less posh and more typical for his age, reinforcing the theory that his genius is fading. Guest appearances and celebrity references create a complex web of real-world connections that blur the line between fiction and reality. When real celebrities appear as themselves, they often interact with the characters in ways that suggest the Family Guy universe exists parallel to our own, with similar historical events and cultural touchstones, but different rules and consequences. The show's treatment of social and political issues has evolved significantly over its run, reflecting changing attitudes and sensibilities. Early episodes featured edgier humor and more controversial content, while recent seasons have shown more awareness of social responsibility. This evolution isn't just about changing times. It reflects character growth and maturity, particularly in how the family members relate to each other and their community. As we drift off to sleep thinking about these interconnected stories and hidden meanings, it becomes clear why Family Guy lore has become such a popular bedtime topic. The show's seemingly chaotic structure actually contains layers of complexity that reward deep analysis and careful attention. Whether you're falling asleep to theories about Stewie's true nature, pondering the implications of Brian's human relationships, or trying to map out the Quahog timeline, Family Guy offers an unexpectedly rich universe that continues to surprise and engage viewers even after decades on the air. Sweet dreams, and remember, in the world of Family Guy, nothing is ever quite as simple as it first appears. What if I told you that the seemingly random chaos of Family Guy actually contains one of the most intricate and bizarre mythologies in television history? Tonight, we're diving deep into the strange, wonderful, and oddly comforting world of Family Griffin lore that will transport you to Quahog and beyond. Picture this. You're settling in for the night, your mind racing with the day's stresses, when suddenly you remember that Family Guy isn't just a collection of cutaway gags and pop culture references. It's actually a surprisingly rich tapestry of interconnected stories, recurring characters, and hidden depths that have been building for over 2 decades. And tonight, we're going to explore every corner of this animated universe in a way that's perfect for drifting off to sleep. Let's start our journey in the town of Quahog, Rhode Island, a place that exists in its own pocket dimension, where the laws of physics are more like gentle suggestions, and where a talking dog can have a Harvard education, while his owner struggles to remember his own name. Quahog isn't just any fictional town. It's a carefully constructed world, with its own history, geography, and cast of hundreds of recurring characters, who each have their own stories to tell. The Griffin family home at 31 Spooner Street serves as our anchor point in this universe. This house has witnessed more supernatural events, time travel incidents, and reality-bending situations than most interdimensional portals. The basement alone has served as everything from a torture chamber to a speakeasy to a portal to different timelines. Each room in this house carries the weight of countless adventures, and if these walls could talk, they'd probably have their own spin-off series. Peter Griffin himself represents something fascinating in the realm of animated characters. He's not just a bumbling father figure. He's a force of nature who somehow manages to survive situations that would destroy lesser mortals. His job, history reads like a fever dream. Brewery worker, fisherman, Renaissance fair knight, bodyguard, paparazzi photographer, and even, briefly, the Pope. Each career change isn't just a throwaway gag, but adds another layer to the mythology of a man who seems to exist outside the normal rules of consequence and reality. The relationship between Peter and his nemesis Giant Chicken, whose real name is Ernie, represents one of television's greatest ongoing feuds. Their battles have destroyed significant portions of Quahog multiple times, yet somehow the town always rebuilds, often in slightly different configurations. These fights aren't just slapstick comedy. They're epic confrontations that span years of real-time storytelling, with each encounter escalating in scope and destruction. The chicken fights serve as a perfect metaphor for the cyclical nature of conflict and resolution, playing out across seasons like a modern-day mythological struggle between order and chaos. Stewie Griffin occupies a unique position in this universe as perhaps the most complex character in animated television. His journey from would-be matricidal infant to time-traveling genius to exploring his own identity represents character development that most live-action dramas would envy. Stewie's inventions have literally reshaped reality multiple times, from his time machine that creates alternate timelines to his weather control device, to his teleportation technology. He's essentially a godlike being trapped in the body of a 1-year-old, which creates an inherent tension that drives many of the show's most interesting storylines. The relationship between Stewie and Brian forms the emotional core of much of Family Guy's deeper mythology. Brian, the talking dog with a bachelor's degree from Brown University, serves as both Stewie's best friend and his philosophical sparring partner. Their adventures together have taken them through time, across dimensions, and into the deepest corners of human and canine experience. Brian's struggles with alcoholism, his failed writing career, and his complex romantic relationships provide grounding for a show that otherwise revels in absurdity. The time travel episodes alone could fill an entire doctoral thesis. The show has established multiple timeline theories. From the straightforward cause and effect changes we see when Stewie prevents his own conception to the more complex multiverse implications of episodes where multiple versions of characters interact. The time travel mythology suggests that every possible version of events exists simultaneously, which explains how characters can die and return, how major life changes can be undone, and how the show can maintain its status quo despite earth-shattering events. Cleveland Brown's departure and return to the series represents something unique in television, a character who literally moved to their own show and then came back, bringing with him the experiences and relationships from that separate universe. This creates a fascinating metatextual layer where the mythology of Family Guy expands to include the mythology of The Cleveland Show, creating an interconnected animated universe that predates many of the cinematic universes we see today. The recurring characters of Quahog each contribute their own threads to this elaborate tapestry. Glenn Quagmire isn't just the perverted neighbor. He's a complex character with his own tragic backstory, his career as a pilot that's taken him around the world, and his complicated relationships with his family members. His house has been the setting for numerous adventures and reveals, and his interactions with the Griffin family have evolved from simple antagonism to a more nuanced dynamic over the years. Joe Swanson represents resilience and determination in a universe that often seems cruel and arbitrary. His backstory as a police officer paralyzed in the line of duty provides weight to his character that goes beyond his role as comic relief. The episodes exploring his relationship with his wife Bonnie and their son Kevin add layers of domestic drama that ground the more outlandish elements of the show. Joe's adventures, from his time as an undercover cop to his brief stint as a superhero, show that even in a world of talking dogs and time machines, human courage and determination still matter. The mythology extends beyond Quahog to include locations like the Drunken Clam, which serves as more than just a bar. It's a sanctuary where the male characters can explore their friendships and fears away from their domestic responsibilities. The bar has witnessed confessions, celebrations, and confrontations that have shaped the relationships between the core characters. Even seemingly minor locations like the grocery store or the church have their own histories and recurring storylines that add depth to the world. The show's approach to celebrity culture creates its own mythology within the mythology. The numerous celebrity appearances aren't just random cameos. They often serve specific narrative functions and become part of the show's internal logic. When celebrities appear as themselves in Quahog, they enter a world where the normal rules don't apply, leading to interactions that are both surreal and surprisingly meaningful. These episodes often explore themes of fame, authenticity, and the price of celebrity in ways that are both hilarious and oddly poignant. The holiday episodes of Family Guy deserve special mention in any discussion of the show's mythology. Christmas episodes don't just repeat the same themes, they build on each other, creating an ongoing narrative about family, tradition, and the meaning of celebration in a chaotic world. The Halloween episodes explore different aspects of horror and the supernatural, often revealing hidden depths to characters we think we know completely. These seasonal episodes serve as anchor points in the show's timeline, providing structure to what might otherwise seem like random storytelling. The show's relationship with death is particularly fascinating from a mythological perspective. Characters die and return regularly, but these deaths aren't meaningless. They serve specific narrative purposes and often lead to character growth or revelation. When Brian died temporarily, the impact rippled through the entire cast and fanbase, demonstrating how deeply these characters have embedded themselves in our collective consciousness. The fact that death isn't permanent in this universe doesn't make it less meaningful. It makes it a tool for exploring different aspects of loss, grief, and redemption. The musical episodes and sequences throughout the series create their own subset of mythology. From Stewie's elaborate musical numbers to Peter's various band formations, music serves as a way for characters to express emotions and ideas that might otherwise be difficult to convey. These musical moments often reveal hidden talents and desires, adding new dimensions to familiar characters. The songs themselves become part of the show's cultural impact, living on beyond their original episodes. The show's exploration of alternate versions of characters provides fascinating glimpses into different possibilities within the Family Guy universe. Evil versions, successful versions, and radically different versions of familiar characters show us that the people we know are just one possible outcome of countless variables. This multiverse approach allows the show to explore different aspects of personality and relationships while maintaining the core dynamics that make the show work. The animal characters beyond Brian add their own elements to the mythology. From Vinny, the dog who temporarily replaced Brian, to the various pets and creatures that have appeared throughout the series, each brings their own perspective on the human condition. These characters often serve as voices of reason or chaos, depending on what the story requires, and their interactions with the main cast reveal different aspects of the characters' personalities. The show's approach to education and intelligence creates interesting contradictions that add depth to the mythology. While Peter is often portrayed as unintelligent, he occasionally displays surprising knowledge or skills that suggest hidden depths. Lois's background in music and her various adventures show that she's much more than just a patient wife and mother. These moments of unexpected competence or knowledge add layers to characters that might otherwise seem one-dimensional. The recurring gags and references throughout the series create their own mythology of inside jokes and shared experiences. The chicken fights, the various ways characters fall and hurt their knees, and the countless cutaway gags all contribute to a shared language that longtime viewers understand implicitly. These elements create a sense of community among fans and add richness to the viewing experience that rewards attention and memory. The show's treatment of technology and progress reflects our own changing relationship with innovation and change. From Stewie's advanced inventions to the family's struggles with new gadgets and social media, Family Guy chronicles our collective journey through the digital age. The technology in the show often serves as a catalyst for character development or plot advancement, showing how tools and toys can reveal hidden aspects of personality and relationships. As we reach the end of our journey through Family Guy's hidden mythology, it becomes clear that this seemingly simple cartoon has created something much more complex and enduring than its surface-level humor might suggest. The world of Quahog and its inhabitants represents a unique achievement in animated storytelling. A universe where anything can happen, but where the core relationships and emotions remain recognizably human. The comfort we find in Family Guy's chaos comes from its consistency within inconsistency. While the plots may be unpredictable and the situations absurd, the characters remain true to their essential natures, creating a reliable foundation beneath all the mayhem. This balance between surprise and familiarity makes it perfect viewing for those moments when we need something engaging enough to occupy our minds, but comfortable enough to help us relax. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, let your mind wander through the streets of Quahog, where talking dogs debate philosophy, babies build time machines, and ordinary families navigate extraordinary circumstances with humor and heart. In this world where anything is possible, perhaps the most magical thing of all is that love and friendship somehow manage to survive and thrive despite all the chaos surrounding them. Sweet dreams. And remember, in the world of Family Guy, tomorrow always brings new adventures, new laughs, and new reasons to appreciate the beautifully bizarre journey of life itself. Have you ever fallen asleep to the chaotic sounds of Peter Griffin crashing through a wall or Stewie plotting world domination? Tonight we're diving deep into the bizarre, twisted, and surprisingly intricate world of Family Guy lore that's somehow become the perfect background noise for millions of viewers worldwide. From the hidden connections between episodes that span decades to the dark secrets lurking beneath Quahog's surface, this is your ultimate guide to the Family Guy universe that will either help you drift off to dreamland or keep you wide awake, questioning everything you thought you knew about America's most dysfunctional animated family. Family Guy has been on our screens for over 2 decades now, and what started as a simple animated sitcom has evolved into something far more complex and layered than most people realize. Tonight we're going to explore the deep lore, the recurring mysteries, the character backstories that only dedicated fans know about, and all the subtle details that make this show a fascinating rabbit hole to fall down as you're trying to fall asleep. Let's start with the Griffin family themselves, because there's so much more to these characters than meets the eye. Peter Griffin isn't just a bumbling father figure. His backstory reveals a man shaped by abandonment, neglect, and a desperate need for acceptance that manifests in increasingly destructive ways. We learn throughout the series that Peter was adopted, never knowing his real father until much later in the show's run. This abandonment issue explains so much about his behavior, his need to be the center of attention, and his often childlike approach to solving problems. But here's where it gets interesting for our sleepy exploration. Peter's job history reads like a fever dream. He's worked at a toy factory, been a fisherman, worked at a brewery, become a bodyguard, tried his hand at being a country music star, worked as a private investigator, and somehow ended up back at the brewery multiple times. Each job change represents a different phase of the show's evolution, and if you're watching chronologically as you fall asleep, you can actually track the show's tonal shifts through Peter's career moves. Lois Griffin presents an even more fascinating character study for our nighttime viewing. She comes from the wealthy Pewterschmidt family, which immediately sets up this class conflict that runs throughout the entire series. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, represents old money, conservative values, and everything that Peter both despises and desperately wants to be accepted by. Lois chose Peter over her privileged background, but this choice haunts their relationship in subtle ways that become more apparent when you're watching with sleepy, unfocused attention. The really interesting lore element here is how Lois's musical background keeps surfacing throughout the series. She's classically trained, she's performed professionally, and there are hints that she gave up a potentially successful career to become a housewife and mother. These musical moments in the show often serve as brief respites from the chaos, making them perfect for viewers who are using the show to wind down. Now let's talk about Meg, because her character arc is actually one of the most complex and disturbing elements of the Family Guy universe. What starts as typical teenage awkwardness evolves into something much darker. The family's treatment of Meg goes beyond normal sibling rivalry or parental frustration. It becomes a systematic emotional abuse that the show initially played for laughs, but gradually reveals as genuinely harmful. The lore around Meg includes several episodes that suggest she's actually the most mentally stable and capable member of the family, which makes her treatment even more tragic. She's shown to be intelligent, talented, and capable of genuine empathy, qualities that the rest of the family either ignores or actively punishes. For viewers drifting off to sleep, Meg's storylines often provide a strange sort of comfort because they're usually quieter and more introspective than the main family chaos. Chris Griffin's character development follows a different trajectory entirely. While he's often dismissed as the dumb kid, the show's lore reveals that Chris has artistic talent, musical ability, and emotional intelligence that surpasses most of his family members. His relationship with his father is complicated by Peter's own insecurities about masculinity and success. Chris represents the possibility of breaking the cycle of dysfunction, which gives his character an underlying hopefulness that works well for bedtime viewing. But let's dive into the real star of Family Guy's complex lore, Stewie Griffin. This character has undergone one of the most dramatic evolutionary arcs in television history. He started as a genuinely evil baby bent on world domination and matricide, but gradually transformed into a complex character dealing with identity, sexuality, and belonging. The show never explicitly addresses this transformation, which creates this fascinating ambiguity about whether Stewie actually changed or whether we're just seeing different aspects of his personality. The time travel episodes featuring Stewie create some of the most intricate lore in the entire series. His future selves, his various timelines, and his technological capabilities suggest a level of intelligence and capability that extends far beyond what we see in regular episodes. These time travel storylines often involve quieter, more contemplative moments that are perfect for viewers who are trying to relax. Stewie's relationship with Brian creates another layer of lore that's perfect for our sleepy exploration. Their friendship transcends the typical pet-owner relationship and becomes something closer to intellectual partnership. They travel together, solve problems together, and engage in philosophical discussions that often serve as the show's more thoughtful moments. Their dynamic provides a consistent emotional anchor throughout the series' more chaotic elements. Speaking of Brian, his character lore is incredibly rich and often overlooked. He's not just a talking dog, he's a failed writer, a recovering alcoholic, a liberal intellectual, and someone struggling with depression and self-worth issues. His various romantic relationships throughout the series reveal someone desperately seeking validation and connection. His death and resurrection in later seasons created one of the most emotionally impactful storylines in the show's history, demonstrating how attached viewers had become to his character. The setting of Quahog itself deserves exploration in our lore deep dive. This fictional Rhode Island town has its own mythology, complete with local celebrities, recurring businesses, and a distinct culture. The Drunken Clam serves as a central gathering place where much of the show's male bonding and philosophical discussions occur. Mort Goldman's pharmacy, the local news station, and various other businesses create a sense of continuity and community that grounds the more absurd elements of the show. Cleveland's departure and return to the series creates interesting lore implications. His time in Virginia with his own spin-off show exists in the same universe, and references to his experiences there occasionally surface in Family Guy episodes. This interconnected universe concept adds depth for viewers who are familiar with both shows. Quagmire's character provides some of the darkest lore in the entire series. While often played for laughs, his behavior patterns suggest serious psychological issues and criminal tendencies. The show occasionally hints at a more complex backstory involving his father's gender transition, his military service, and his dysfunctional relationship patterns. These darker elements create an interesting contrast with his seemingly cheerful demeanor. Joe Swanson's backstory as a disabled police officer adds another layer of complexity to the Quahog community. His accident, his marriage to Bonnie, and his struggle to maintain his sense of purpose and masculinity after becoming paralyzed provide some of the show's more serious emotional content. His friendship with Peter, Cleveland, and Quagmire often explores themes of loyalty, acceptance, and adaptation that work well for contemplative viewing. The show's cutaway gags, while seemingly random, actually create their own form of lore through recurring characters and situations. Conway Twitty appearances, the various historical figures Peter claims to have interacted with, and the recurring joke characters all contribute to the show's internal mythology. These cutaways often provide brief mental breaks that can be soothing for viewers trying to wind down. Family Guy's approach to continuity is deliberately loose, which actually makes it perfect for casual viewing. Unlike serialized dramas that require intense attention to plot details, Family Guy episodes can be enjoyed independently, while still rewarding longtime viewers with references and callbacks. This makes it ideal for background viewing, or for times when you're not paying complete attention. The show's musical numbers deserve special mention in our lore exploration. From Conway Twitty performances to elaborate Broadway-style productions, these musical interludes often serve as the show's most memorable and emotionally resonant moments. They break up the rapid-fire joke delivery and provide opportunities for character development and emotional expression. The various holiday episodes throughout the series create their own seasonal lore. Christmas episodes often explore themes of family, tradition, and redemption. Halloween episodes venture into horror and supernatural territory. These special episodes often feature higher production values and more elaborate storytelling that reward dedicated viewing. The show's treatment of religion, politics, and social issues creates ongoing lore threads that reflect changing social attitudes over the show's long run. Early episodes approach these topics differently than later ones, creating an interesting timeline of cultural evolution that can be tracked through the series' progression. Guest appearances and celebrity encounters in Family Guy often become part of the show's lore through recurring references and callbacks. These celebrity interactions sometimes extend beyond single episodes, creating ongoing relationships and references that reward longtime viewers. The various alternate reality and parallel universe episodes explore different versions of the Griffin family and Quahog community. These episodes often reveal character depths and relationship dynamics that aren't apparent in regular episodes. They also provide opportunities to explore what-if scenarios that add complexity to our understanding of the main characters. Family Guy's animation style evolution tells its own story about the show's development and budget changes over time. Early episodes have a distinctly different look and feel compared to more recent ones. This visual evolution creates a subtle timeline that longtime viewers can use to place episodes chronologically, even without checking air dates. The show's relationship with Fox Network, including its cancellation and resurrection, becomes part of its own metalore. Episodes that reference these real-world events blur the line between fiction and reality in ways that add extra layers for dedicated fans to discover and contemplate. As we wind down our exploration of Family Guy's rich lore landscape, it's worth noting that this depth and complexity is part of what makes the show so suitable for repeated viewing and background watching. There's always another layer to discover, another connection to make, another character detail to notice. Whether you're actively watching or letting it play, while you drift off to sleep, Family Guy's universe provides a consistent, familiar, and surprisingly deep world to explore. The beauty of Family Guy lore for bedtime viewing lies in its perfect balance of familiarity and discovery. You can watch episodes you've seen dozens of times and still notice new details, catch references you missed before, or simply let the familiar voices and situations wash over you as you relax. The show's episodic nature means you won't lose important plot threads if you fall asleep mid-episode, but its rich lore rewards those moments when you find yourself unexpectedly engaged and alert. Sweet dreams. And remember that somewhere in Quahog, Peter Griffin is probably about to do something that will somehow make perfect sense within the wonderfully chaotic universe that has been entertaining us for over 2 decades. Did you know that Family Guy has been running for so long that if you watched every episode back to back, you'd be sitting there for over 7 days straight without sleeping? And tonight, we're going to explore the deep, intricate lore of this animated universe in the most soothing way possible. So, grab your favorite blanket, get comfortable, and let me take you through the fascinating world of Quahog, Rhode Island, where nothing is quite what it seems on the surface. The Griffin family saga begins long before Peter Griffin ever graced our television screens. In the quiet suburban streets of Spooner Street, a complex web of relationships, histories, and mysteries has been weaving itself for decades. Tonight, we'll unravel these threads slowly and gently, allowing the rich tapestry of Family Guy's storytelling to wash over you like a warm, comfortable wave. Let's start our journey with the patriarch himself, Peter Griffin. Born in 1956, Peter's origin story is far more complex than his simple-minded exterior might suggest. His biological father, Mickey McFinnigan, was an Irish fighter pilot who had a brief romance with Peter's mother, Thelma Griffin, during World War II. This revelation, discovered much later in the series, adds layers to Peter's character that extend far beyond his love of beer and television. Growing up in Providence, Rhode Island, Peter's childhood was marked by the influence of his stepfather, Francis Griffin, a deeply religious man whose stern demeanor shaped much of Peter's rebellious adult personality. The tension between Peter's carefree nature and his stepfather's rigid expectations created psychological patterns that would follow him throughout his life, manifesting in his relationships with authority figures and his own parenting style. The Griffin family home at 31 Spooner Street holds secrets within its walls that span generations. Built in the 1940s, the house has witnessed decades of Quahog's evolution from a quiet fishing village to the bustling suburban community we know today. Each room tells a story, From the basement where Peter keeps his various collections and hiding spots, to the attic, where family memories gather dust alongside forgotten treasures. Lois Schmidt Griffin brings her own rich family history to the Griffin legacy. Born into the wealthy Schmidt family, her upbringing in Newport, Rhode Island, was marked by privilege and expectations that she would eventually rebel against by marrying Peter. Her father, Carter Schmidt, represents old money aristocracy, while her mother, Barbara, embodies the socialite lifestyle that Lois chose to leave behind for suburban family life. The love story between Peter and Lois began in the most unlikely circumstances. Their first meeting at a college party seemed destined for disaster, with Peter's crude humor clashing against Lois's refined sensibilities. Yet beneath the surface differences, they found a connection that would withstand decades of marriage, countless adventures, and the chaos that seems to follow the Griffin family wherever they go. Their eldest child, Meg Griffin, carries the weight of being the family scapegoat, but her character development reveals depths that extend far beyond the surface-level jokes. Born Megatron Griffin, her name itself hints at the complex relationship she has with power and identity. Throughout the series, glimpses of Meg's inner strength emerge, suggesting that her current role in the family dynamic may be more temporary than it appears. Chris Griffin, the middle child, represents the gentle heart of the Griffin family. His artistic nature and kind spirit often serve as a counterbalance to the chaos surrounding him. His relationship with his imaginary friend and his various creative pursuits reveal a sensitive soul navigating the complexities of adolescence while surrounded by the unconventional family dynamics that define the Griffin household. The youngest Griffin, Stewie, presents perhaps the most intriguing mystery in the entire series. His advanced intelligence, sophisticated vocabulary, and mysterious origins create questions that have puzzled fans for years. Some episodes suggest he's a genius infant, others hint at time travel capabilities, and still others present him as an ordinary baby whose adventures might exist primarily in his imagination. Brian Griffin, the family's talking dog, serves as both comic relief and philosophical anchor for the series. His role as the most rational member of the family often puts him in the position of voice of reason, though his own flaws and struggles with alcoholism and failed relationships make him a complex character rather than a simple moral compass. The extended Griffin family tree branches out in fascinating directions. Peter's sister, Karen, and his various relatives create a network of relationships that span different social classes and geographic regions. Each family gathering reveals new dynamics and old resentments that have been simmering beneath the surface for decades. Quahog itself functions almost as a character in the Family Guy universe. This fictional Rhode Island town has its own history, complete with founding families, local legends, and community traditions that date back centuries. The Drunken Clam, Peter's favorite bar, serves as more than just a drinking establishment. It's a social hub where local politics, gossip, and friendships are forged and tested. The town's various establishments each carry their own stories. The grocery store where Peter works has seen multiple ownership changes and corporate restructures, reflecting broader economic changes in small-town America. The local news station provides a window into Quahog's relationship with the outside world, while the various restaurants and shops create a sense of community continuity. Among Quahog's most colorful residents, we find characters whose backstories interweave with the Griffin family narrative in unexpected ways. Glenn Quagmire, the Griffin's neighbor, carries secrets from his past as a naval officer and pilot that occasionally surface to add depth to his character beyond his more obvious personality traits. His family history, including his relationship with his parents and his various romantic entanglements, creates ripple effects throughout the community. Cleveland Brown's departure and eventual return to Quahog represents one of the series' most significant character developments. His journey to Virginia and back again brought new perspectives to old friendships, while his marriage to Donna and the blending of their families created new dynamics in the established social order of Spooner Street. Joe Swanson's background as a police officer adds layers of law enforcement history to the neighborhood dynamic. His disability, acquired in the line of duty, represents both personal triumph and ongoing challenge. while his relationship with his wife Bonnie and their family creates another thread in the complex web of Spooner Street relationships. The recurring characters who populate Quahog each bring their own histories and motivations to the community. Mayor Adam West's eccentric leadership style masks a deeper commitment to his town, while his bizarre decisions often reveal unexpected wisdom. Dr. Hartman's medical practice serves the community despite his questionable competence, and his interactions with the Griffin family often provide insights into the town's healthcare system and social services. The series' approach to continuity creates interesting challenges for understanding Family Guy lore. Some episodes exist in their own bubble, while others build upon previous storylines or reference past events. This flexible approach to storytelling allows for both standalone adventures and deeper character development, creating a rich tapestry of experiences that can be appreciated on multiple levels. Religious and deeper, spiritual themes weave throughout Family Guy's narrative structure. Peter's complicated relationship with faith, influenced by his Catholic upbringing and his current skepticism, creates ongoing tension with his stepfather's devout beliefs. Lois's more moderate approach to spirituality provides balance, while the children navigate their own relationships with religious concepts and community expectations. The economic realities of the Griffin family life reflect broader American middle-class experiences. Peter's various jobs and career changes mirror the instability many families face in changing economic conditions, while Lois's occasional work outside the home represents the increasing necessity for dual-income households in suburban communities. Educational themes emerge through the children's school experiences at James Woods High School. The various teachers, administrators, and fellow students create a microcosm of American public education, complete with funding challenges, administrative politics, and the ongoing struggle to provide quality education in an underfunded system. Transportation plays a significant role in Family Guy lore, from Peter's various vehicles to the family's travel adventures. Each mode of transportation represents different aspects of American mobility culture, from the freedom of car ownership to the challenges of public transportation and the dreams of exotic travel destinations. The series' treatment of technology evolution provides a unique window into changing American society. Early episodes reflect the technology available at the time, while later episodes incorporate smartphones, social media, and digital culture into the storylines, creating interesting contrasts in how the characters adapt to technological change. Food culture permeates Family Guy storytelling, from Peter's love of unhealthy cuisine to the family's dining experiences at various restaurants. These food-related storylines often reflect broader American attitudes toward nutrition, dining culture, and the role of food in family bonding and social interaction. The changing seasons in Quahog provide natural rhythm to the series' storytelling. Holiday episodes create opportunities for family traditions, while seasonal activities reflect the natural cycle of New England life. These seasonal elements ground the fantastic elements of the show in recognizable patterns of American suburban life. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through Family Guy lore, it's worth noting that this animated universe continues to evolve and expand. New episodes add fresh layers to established characters, while introducing new elements to the community of Quahog. The ongoing nature of the series means that tonight's exploration represents just one moment in a continuously growing tapestry of storytelling. The Griffin family's adventures, both mundane and extraordinary, reflect universal themes of family, community, and personal growth, wrapped in the distinctive comedic style that has made Family Guy a cultural phenomenon. Whether dealing with everyday suburban challenges or embarking on impossible adventures, the characters of Quahog remind us that family bonds, friendship, and community connections provide the foundation for navigating life's complexities. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, let the gentle chaos of Spooner Street fade into peaceful dreams, knowing that tomorrow will bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities for the Griffin family and their neighbors to discover what it truly means to be part of something larger than themselves in the wonderfully weird world of Family Guy. Have you ever wondered why Family Guy has been running for over 2 decades and somehow still manages to surprise us with its bizarre storylines and character developments? Tonight we're diving deep into the twisted wonderland that is Family Guy lore, exploring every hidden detail, forgotten plotline, and mind-bending continuity that makes this animated universe so captivating. So grab your favorite blanket, settle in, and let's explore the chaotic genius of Seth MacFarlane's creation in the most relaxing way possible. Family Guy first premiered in 1999, introducing us to the Griffin family in the fictional town of Quahog, Rhode Island. But what makes this show truly fascinating isn't just its crude humor or celebrity parodies. It's the intricate web of backstories, recurring characters, and interconnected plotlines that have evolved over more than 20 seasons. The show has created an entire universe with its own rules, physics, and logic that somehow makes perfect sense within its own context. Let's start with the patriarch of the family, Peter Griffin. On the surface, he appears to be just another bumbling cartoon dad, but his character has layers upon layers of complexity that have been revealed over the years. Peter works at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, a job he's held for most of the series despite his obvious incompetence. The brewery itself has become a character in the show, with its own history and significance to the town of Quahog. We've learned that the brewery was founded by Francis Griffin, Peter's father, who had a complicated relationship with his son that influenced much of Peter's behavior and worldview. Peter's ancestry is surprisingly diverse and complex. Throughout the series, we've discovered that he has Irish, German, and even extraterrestrial lineage. His Irish heritage connects him to Mickey McFinnigan, a character who represents Peter's more aggressive and confrontational side. The German connection links him to Franz Gutentag, revealing Peter's capacity for both creativity and destruction. These ancestral connections aren't just throwaway gags, but actually inform Peter's personality and explain some of his more extreme behaviors. The Griffin house itself is a character with its own mysteries and secrets. Located at 31 Spooner Street, the house has witnessed countless bizarre events and transformations. The basement has served as everything from a speakeasy during Prohibition flashbacks to a torture chamber in various episodes. The house's layout seems to change depending on the needs of each episode, but certain elements remain consistent, creating a sense of familiarity and comfort for longtime viewers. Lois Griffin brings her own rich backstory to the family dynamic. Born into the wealthy Pewterschmidt family, she gave up a life of luxury to marry Peter, a decision that continues to baffle her parents throughout the series. Her musical talents, particularly her piano skills, have been a recurring element that adds depth to her character. Lois has also demonstrated surprising combat skills and strategic thinking, suggesting a more complex personality beneath her patient housewife exterior. The Pewterschmidt family fortune adds another layer to the show's mythology. Francis Pewterschmidt's wealth comes from various questionable business ventures, including connections to organized crime and political corruption. This background creates interesting dynamics when the Griffin family interacts with Lois's relatives, often highlighting the contrast between Peter's working-class sensibilities and the upper-class world Lois left behind. Meg Griffin represents one of the most interesting character developments in the series. Initially portrayed as a typical teenage daughter, Meg has evolved into something much more complex. Her treatment by the family serves multiple narrative purposes, from comic relief to social commentary. But beneath the surface abuse lies a character with remarkable resilience and hidden depths. Meg has demonstrated extraordinary survival skills, leadership abilities, and even psychopathic tendencies that suggest she may be the most dangerous member of the Griffin family. The show has explored Meg's potential futures in various episodes, showing her as everything from a successful businesswoman to a hardened criminal. These glimpses into alternate timelines reveal that Meg's current situation may be holding back someone with tremendous potential for both good and evil. Her relationship with her family, particularly her father, reflects broader themes about family dynamics and the impact of emotional abuse on personal development. Chris Griffin embodies the innocent chaos that runs through the Griffin family DNA. His artistic talents and creative imagination often serve as windows into the show's more surreal elements. Chris's drawings and stories frequently predict or parallel the main plot lines, suggesting he may have some form of prescient abilities. His relationship with his imaginary friend and various supernatural encounters hint at a deeper connection to the mystical elements that occasionally surface in the show. The youngest Griffin, Stewie, presents perhaps the most complex character in the entire series. His intelligence fluctuates dramatically depending on the needs of each episode, but his core personality remains consistently fascinating. Stewie's relationship with time travel has become central to the show's mythology, allowing for exploration of alternate timelines and potential futures. His scientific genius enables him to create impossible inventions that somehow function within the show's universe. Stewie's sexuality has been handled with surprising nuance throughout the series. Rather than making definitive statements, the show has allowed his character to evolve naturally, exploring themes of identity and self-discovery in ways that feel authentic despite the absurd context. His relationships with other characters, particularly Brian and Chris, reveal different aspects of his personality and emotional development. Brian Griffin occupies a unique position as both pet and family member. His intellectual pretensions and political opinions often serve as a voice of reason within the chaotic Griffin household, though his own flaws and hypocrisies are regularly exposed. Brian's writing career provides commentary on artistic ambition and the struggle for creative success. His various romantic relationships and personal failures make him one of the most relatable characters. Despite being a talking dog, the show has explored Brian's mortality in ways that other animated series rarely attempt. His near-death experiences and actual temporary death created genuine emotional moments that demonstrated the show's capacity for sincere storytelling alongside its trademark irreverence. Brian's relationship with alcohol and his struggles with depression add layers of complexity that elevate him beyond simple comic relief. Quahog itself functions as more than just a setting for the Griffin family's adventures. The town has its own history, politics, and culture that influence the stories and characters. The Drunken Clam serves as Peter's primary social hub, where he interacts with his core group of friends. These friendships have evolved over the years, revealing backstories and dynamics that enrich the overall narrative. Cleveland Brown's departure and subsequent return to the show created interesting continuity questions and opportunities for character development. His friendship with Peter predates the series and provides stability in Peter's otherwise chaotic social life. Joe Swanson's paralysis and his career as a police officer create dramatic tension and opportunities for both humor and genuine emotion. Glenn Quagmire represents the show's most controversial character, whose extreme behavior serves as commentary on toxic masculinity and social boundaries. The recurring villains and antagonists in Family Guy create ongoing narrative threads that connect episodes across seasons. Ernie the Giant Chicken represents Peter's capacity for holding grudges and his tendency toward extreme responses to minor slights. Their elaborate fight sequences have become legendary within the show's mythology, each one topping the previous encounter in terms of scope and destruction. The evil monkey in Chris's closet evolved from a simple sight gag into a character with his own motivations and backstory. The resolution of his conflict with Chris demonstrated the show's ability to address long-running mysteries while maintaining its comedic sensibilities. These types of character arcs show that even the most absurd elements of the show can be given meaningful context and resolution. Death himself has appeared multiple times throughout the series, establishing a mythology around mortality and the afterlife within the Family Guy universe. His interactions with the Griffin family suggest they occupy a special place in the cosmic order, perhaps explaining their ability to survive increasingly dangerous and absurd situations. The show's handling of religious and spiritual themes walks a careful line between satire and genuine exploration of existential questions. The multiverse concept has become increasingly important to Family Guy's storytelling approach. Episodes featuring alternate versions of the characters allow for exploration of different possibilities and character development paths. These alternate realities often reveal core truths about the main characters by showing how they might behave under different circumstances. The Road 2 episodes featuring Stewie and Brian's adventures in different locations showcase the show's ability to parody various genres while advancing character relationships. These episodes often feature higher production values and more sophisticated storytelling techniques, demonstrating the creative team's range and ambition. The locations themselves become characters, each presenting unique challenges and opportunities for character growth. Celebrity encounters within the show create a meta-commentary on fame and popular culture. Rather than simple cameo appearances, these interactions often reveal aspects of the Griffin family's personalities and values. The show's willingness to satirize celebrities, while also humanizing them, creates complex relationships between fiction and reality. The time travel elements introduced through Stewie's inventions have allowed the show to explore historical periods and potential futures. These temporal adventures often carry surprising emotional weight, as characters confront the consequences of their actions across different time periods. The rules governing time travel within the show's universe remain deliberately vague, allowing for maximum storytelling flexibility. Family Guy's handling of controversial topics demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of comedy's role in social commentary. By pushing boundaries and challenging taboos, the show creates opportunities for genuine discussion about difficult subjects. The characters' reactions to these situations often reveal their core values and moral frameworks, adding depth to what might otherwise be simple shock humor. The show's relationship with its own continuity creates interesting metatextual layers. Episodes that acknowledge previous events or reference long-running jokes demonstrate respect for longtime viewers while remaining accessible to newcomers. This balance between continuity and accessibility requires careful attention to storytelling craft that often goes unnoticed. The musical elements throughout Family Guy serve multiple narrative functions beyond simple entertainment. Conway Twitty appearances became running gags that tested viewer patience while commenting on pacing and expectations. The original songs created for the show often advance character development or provide emotional release during particularly intense storylines. The animation style itself has evolved significantly since the show's debut, reflecting both technological advances and changing aesthetic preferences. The increased detail and smoother movement in recent seasons create different possibilities for visual storytelling and character expression. These improvements allow for more subtle emotional moments and complex sight gags. The show's international episodes and cultural references demonstrate awareness of global perspectives while maintaining its distinctly American viewpoint. These cultural explorations often reveal the characters' prejudices and assumptions, creating opportunities for growth and understanding. The research and attention to detail in these episodes shows respect for the cultures being portrayed, even when satirizing them. As we've journeyed through the vast landscape of Family Guy lore, we've discovered that beneath its irreverent surface lies a surprisingly sophisticated storytelling universe. The show's longevity stems not just from its ability to shock and entertain, but from its commitment to character development and narrative complexity. Each episode adds new layers to this rich tapestry, creating connections and possibilities that keep viewers engaged across decades of viewing. The Griffin family's adventures continue to evolve, promising new mysteries and revelations for future exploration. Whether you're a longtime fan or a curious newcomer, there's always something new to discover in the wonderfully chaotic world of Family Guy. Sweet dreams, and remember that in Quahog, anything is possible. You know that feeling when you're lying in bed scrolling through endless videos trying to find something that'll help you drift off to sleep? Most people go for rain sounds or meditation videos, but there's this weird corner of the internet that's discovered something completely unexpected: Family Guy lore videos. And honestly, it makes perfect sense once you think about it. Picture this: Peter Griffin's bumbling voice rambling about some ridiculous backstory while you slowly fade into dreamland. It's like having that one friend who tells really long, meandering stories that somehow become the perfect background noise for sleep. But here's the thing: Family Guy isn't just random jokes and cutaway gags. There's actually this incredibly deep, twisted universe hiding beneath all the chaos, and when you start exploring it at bedtime, something magical happens. Tonight, we're diving into the strangest, most soothing rabbit hole on YouTube. We're talking about Family Guy lore that's specifically designed to help you sleep. And trust me, by the end of this journey, you'll understand why millions of people are choosing Stewie's time travel adventures over counting sheep. Let's start with why this works so well. Your brain needs something engaging enough to distract from racing thoughts, but not so stimulating that it keeps you awake. Family Guy lore hits this sweet spot perfectly. The familiar voices create a sense of comfort, like having old friends nearby. The storylines are complex enough to occupy your mind, but delivered in that laid-back, conversational tone that naturally slows your heart rate. The beauty of Family Guy as sleep content lies in its structure. Unlike other shows that build tension toward climactic moments, Family Guy operates on this weird, episodic flow where nothing is too serious or urgent. Even when Peter is destroying the town or Stewie is plotting world domination, there's this underlying absurdity that signals to your brain that everything is okay. It's chaos, but comfortable chaos. One of the most popular sleep topics is Stewie's time travel timeline. Now, if you've watched the show casually, you might think Stewie's time adventures are just random episodes. But when you dig deeper, there's this incredibly complex web of cause and effect that spans decades. Stewie has literally shaped the Griffin family history in ways most viewers never realize. Think about it. In one timeline, Stewie prevents his own birth, which creates this paradox where he exists but shouldn't. In another, he saves his father's life, completely altering the family dynamic. These aren't just throwaway episodes. They're building blocks of an intricate multiverse where every action ripples through time. And when someone narrates this in a gentle, sleepy voice while you're tucked in bed, it becomes this dreamy exploration of cause and effect that naturally leads your mind into sleep. The time travel lore gets even more interesting when you consider Stewie's relationship with Brian. Their adventures through different eras reveal hidden layers of both characters. Brian isn't just the family dog who talks. He's this tortured intellectual who's lived through multiple timelines, sometimes remembering previous versions of events, sometimes completely oblivious. The complexity of their friendship across different realities becomes this beautiful, melancholy meditation on friendship and loyalty. What makes this perfect for sleep is how these time travel stories often end with everything returning to normal, or at least a version of normal. There's no real stakes because the show's format demands that the status quo be maintained. Your subconscious picks up on this pattern and relaxes, knowing that no matter how wild the adventure gets, the Griffin family will be okay by morning. Another incredibly soothing topic is the hidden depth of Peter Griffin's character. On the surface, he's just this obnoxious, immature father figure. But when you start examining his backstory, there's surprising emotional complexity. Peter's relationship with his own father, Francis, reveals layers of abandonment issues and the desperate need for approval that drives much of his behavior. The Catholic guilt that shapes Peter's worldview, his struggles with identity, his genuine love for his family despite constantly endangering them, all of this creates this rich psychological portrait. When narrated as bedtime content, Peter's flaws become almost endearing. He's not a bad person, he's just deeply human in the most ridiculous possible way. The show has quietly built this mythology around Peter's various jobs and failures. From working at the brewery to his brief stint as a country music star, each career represents a different aspect of the American dream gone wrong. But instead of being depressing, it's oddly comforting. Peter always bounces back, always finds something new to be enthusiastic about. His resilience becomes this gentle reminder that failure isn't permanent, that there's always another chance to mess things up in new and interesting ways. Lois Griffin's background provides another rich vein of sleep-friendly lore. Her wealthy upbringing, her musical talents, her complicated relationship with her parents, all of this creates this fascinating contrast with her current life. She chose chaos over comfort, love over luxury. When explored in that drowsy, contemplative tone that characterizes good sleep content, Lois becomes this complex figure who represents the compromises we all make for love. The show has revealed that Lois has this incredibly patient, almost saint-like quality that allows her to tolerate Peter's behavior. But occasionally, we see cracks in this facade, moments where her true feelings break through. These glimpses of Lois's inner life become fascinating character studies when presented as gentle bedtime analysis. Meg Griffin represents something even more interesting in the show's mythology. She's the perpetual outsider, the family member who never quite fits in. But when you examine her character closely, she's often the most sensible person in the room. Her isolation isn't really about her being unlikable. It's about her being different, more grounded than the rest of her chaotic family. The psychological dynamics of how the Griffin family treats Meg, reveal uncomfortable truths about family structures and social hierarchies. But when explored as sleep content, these observations become philosophical musings rather than harsh critiques. Meg's resilience in the face of constant rejection becomes almost inspiring, a quiet testament to the strength of people who don't fit conventional molds. Chris Griffin's journey through adolescence provides another layer of gentle complexity. His artistic talents, his kind heart, his struggles with self-image, all of this unfolds against the backdrop of typical teenage challenges, amplified by his family's dysfunction. Chris represents hope in the Griffin universe, the possibility that the next generation might break free from destructive patterns. The show has developed this subtle running theme about Chris's potential. He's genuinely talented, genuinely caring, but constantly undermined by his environment. When narrated as bedtime content, Chris's story becomes this quiet meditation on nurture versus nature, on how children can maintain their essential goodness despite chaotic circumstances. Brian Griffin deserves special attention because he's arguably the most complex character in the entire series. He's an intellectual trapped in a dog's body, an artist struggling with mediocrity, a liberal idealist living in a conservative household. His pretensions and failures make him simultaneously the most relatable and most frustrating character. Brian's writing career, his romantic relationships, his drinking problem, his philosophical debates with Stewie, all of this creates this rich tapestry of middle-aged disappointment wrapped in surreal comedy. When presented as sleep content, Brian's struggles become universal human experiences filtered through the lens of absurdity. The relationship between Brian and Stewie forms the emotional core of many episodes, and their dynamic has evolved significantly over the show's long run. Early episodes portrayed them as adversaries, but they've developed into this unusual friendship between two intellectuals who understand each other's isolation within the Griffin household. Their conversations, whether they're traveling through time or just sitting in the living room, often touch on profound themes of mortality, purpose, and connection. When these moments are compiled and narrated as bedtime content, they become these surprisingly deep philosophical discussions that naturally lead the mind toward contemplative rest. The supporting characters in Family Guy have developed their own rich backstories that provide endless material for sleep-friendly content. Glenn Quagmire, despite his obvious character flaws, has this complex history as a pilot and adventurer. His relationship with his father, his military service, his various romantic entanglements, all of this creates this surprisingly detailed character study. Cleveland Brown's departure and return to the show created interesting continuity questions that lore enthusiasts love to explore. The dynamics of the friend group, how relationships change over time, how people grow apart and come back together, these themes resonate on a deeper level when explored in that gentle bedtime storytelling style. Joe Swanson's backstory as a police officer and his adjustment to life in a wheelchair provides material for surprisingly touching character exploration. His determination, his relationship with his family, his role as the moral center of Peter's friend group, all of this unfolds into rich character development that works beautifully as sleep content. The world building in Family Guy extends beyond the main characters to include the town of Quahog itself, the recurring locations, the background characters who appear across multiple episodes, the local politics and social dynamics. All of this creates a lived-in universe that feels surprisingly real despite its cartoon absurdity. The show has developed this consistent internal logic about how Quahog operates, from the local government to the business community to the social hierarchies. When explored as lore content, these details create this comforting sense of a complete world where everything has its place, even if that place is completely ridiculous. Family Guy's relationship with pop culture provides another fascinating avenue for sleep-friendly exploration. The show's countless references and parodies create this massive web of connections to movies, TV shows, music, and historical events. Tracing these references becomes like a gentle intellectual exercise that occupies the mind without overstimulating it. The cultural commentary embedded in these references often reveals surprising insight about American society, entertainment, and human nature. When presented as bedtime analysis, these observations become thoughtful cultural criticism delivered in the most relaxed possible format. The show's approach to continuity creates interesting puzzles for lore enthusiasts. Some episodes clearly exist in the same universe, building on previous events and character development. Others seem to exist in isolation, resetting everything back to a baseline. Understanding which episodes connect and which stand alone becomes this gentle mental exercise, perfect for bedtime. This flexible approach to continuity actually enhances the show's value as sleep content. Unlike serialized dramas where missing details might leave you confused, Family Guy's episodic nature means you can drift in and out of consciousness without losing the thread of what's happening. The animation style and visual storytelling in Family Guy contribute to its effectiveness as sleep content. The character designs are simple and comforting. The color palette is warm and familiar, and the pacing of visual jokes follows predictable patterns. Your brain learns to anticipate the rhythm of the show, which naturally promotes relaxation. The voice acting deserves special mention because the performers have developed these characters over decades. The familiarity of these voices creates an immediate sense of comfort and security. Seth MacFarlane's multiple character voices, Alex Borstein as Lois, Mila Kunis as Meg, each voice becomes like a comfortable presence in your bedroom. The musical elements in Family Guy add another layer of sleep-friendly content. The show frequently features elaborate musical numbers that range from Broadway-style productions to simple character songs. These musical interludes often reveal character depths and emotions that regular dialogue might not capture. When compiled as sleep content, these musical moments become like gentle lullabies that showcase different aspects of the characters' personalities. Conway's witty performances, Stewie's show tunes, Peter's various musical adventures, all of this creates a diverse soundtrack for drifting off to sleep. The show's exploration of family dynamics provides universal themes that resonate regardless of the absurd context. The Griffin family, despite their dysfunction, genuinely cares about each other. Their conflicts and reconciliations follow familiar patterns that most viewers can relate to from their own family experiences. When examined as bedtime content, these family relationships become comforting reminders of the complexity and resilience of human connections. Even when Peter does something incredibly selfish or Stewie plots against his mother, the underlying love and loyalty always reassert themselves. The meta-humor in Family Guy creates another interesting layer for lore exploration. The show frequently acknowledges its own existence as a television program, breaking the fourth wall and commenting on its own production. These moments create this playful relationship between the show and its audience that enhances its value as comfort viewing. Understanding the real-world context behind certain episodes and jokes adds depth to the viewing experience without requiring intense concentration. The show's commentary on television, animation, and entertainment industry becomes gentle insider knowledge that enhances appreciation without demanding active analysis. The evolution of Family Guy over its many seasons provides rich material for comparative analysis. Early episodes had different character dynamics, different humor styles, and different production values. Tracing how the show has changed and developed becomes like following the growth of old friends. This long-term perspective on the series creates a sense of history and continuity that enhances its comfort value. You're not just watching random episodes. You're participating in this ongoing story that has unfolded over decades of real time. The fan community around Family Guy has developed its own theories and interpretations that add layers of meaning to seemingly simple episodes. These fan theories become part of the show's extended lore, creating additional content for exploration and discussion. When presented as bedtime content, these fan interpretations and theories become like bedtime stories shared among friends. They're speculative and playful rather than definitive, which makes them perfect for that drowsy state between wakefulness and sleep. The cultural impact of Family Guy extends beyond entertainment into social commentary and cultural criticism. The show has influenced animation, humor, and television production in measurable ways. Understanding this broader impact adds depth to individual episodes without requiring intense focus. This cultural context becomes another gentle layer of analysis that enhances the viewing experience. You're not just watching cartoons, you're experiencing a significant piece of contemporary American culture that has shaped entertainment and comedy. The merchandising and spin-off content around Family Guy creates additional universe expansion that lore enthusiasts love to explore. Video games, books, merchandise, and related media all contribute to the overall Griffin family mythology. These extensions of the core show become like supplementary reading that enhances understanding without being essential. They're bonus content that rewards dedicated fans while remaining accessible to casual viewers. So there you have it, the surprisingly deep and genuinely soothing world of Family Guy lore designed specifically for sleep. What started as a simple animated comedy has evolved into this rich, complex universe filled with character development, cultural commentary, and surprisingly profound themes about family, friendship, and human nature. The next time you're lying awake at 3 a.m, scrolling through endless content options, remember that sometimes the most unexpected choices make the best bedtime companions. Peter Griffin's chaotic adventures and Stewie's time travel paradoxes might just be exactly what your brain needs to finally relax and drift off into peaceful sleep. Sweet dreams. And remember, in the multiverse of Family Guy, everything always works out in the end, which is exactly the kind of reassurance we all need before closing our eyes for the night.
All right, let me tell you something wild. You think you know Family Guy? You think you sat through every single episode of Season 5, caught every joke, noticed every background detail, picked up on every single thing the writers snuck in there? I promise you, you did not. I have been down a rabbit hole so deep on this season that I genuinely lost track of time. And what I found is going to completely change how you look at some of the most iconic episodes ever made. So buckle up because we are about to go through some genuinely insane facts about Family Guy Season 5 that most people have never heard before. Before we get into it, I just want to say that Season 5 holds a very specific place in the hearts of Family Guy fans. This was the show at the peak of its confidence. The writers had already proved themselves. The characters had settled into who they were. And the creative team was pushing boundaries in ways that honestly television had never really seen before. This was the season where Family Guy stopped just being a funny cartoon and started being something that people genuinely talked about the morning after it aired. And when you start digging into what actually went on behind the scenes, in the writing room, in the animation process, in the decisions that got made about specific jokes and storylines, the whole thing gets even more interesting. So let us start with something that sets the tone for this entire season. The 5th season of Family Guy premiered on September 10th, 2006. Now that seems like a simple enough piece of information, but what makes it fascinating is the context around it. The show had already come back from cancellation once at this point. Fox had canceled Family Guy in 2002 after 3 seasons. And it came back in 2005 due to incredible DVD sales and strong ratings on Adult Swim. So by the time Season 5 rolled around, Seth MacFarlane and his team were operating with a very different kind of energy. They were not just making a show, they were making a statement. They were proving that they belonged back on television, and that attitude bleeds into every single episode of this season in a way that you can absolutely feel when you watch it. Now here is something that a lot of people either do not know or have completely forgotten. Season 5 is the season that gave us the episode Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, which was a 2-part storyline that actually aired as the season finale and then the season premiere of Season 6. The production of these 2 episodes was treated with an almost movie level of seriousness by the creative team. The writers spent an enormous amount of time figuring out how to make both outcomes feel genuinely surprising while also being internally consistent with the characters. The animators put extra work into specific sequences that were designed to feel more cinematic than a typical Family Guy episode. When you watch those episodes back knowing that information, you start noticing things that you might have glossed over before. The lighting choices in certain scenes, the way specific camera angles are framed. There is a level of craft in those episodes that goes beyond what the show usually did. Let us talk about something a little more unexpected. The episode titled Chick Cancer, which is Season 5, Episode 7, contains what many people consider to be one of the most technically ambitious musical numbers in the history of the show up to that point. The production of that sequence involved a significant amount of coordination between the writers, the music department, and the animation team. What most people do not realize is that musical numbers in animated television are not written and produced the way you might imagine. The music typically gets recorded first, then the animation gets created to match it, which means the comedic timing of every single visual gag in a musical sequence has to be locked in before the animators even start drawing. The team working on Season 5 had become incredibly skilled at this process, and it shows in how tight and precise those moments feel. Here is a fact that absolutely blew my mind when I first came across it. Seth MacFarlane does the voices of Peter Griffin, Stewie Griffin, Brian Griffin, and Quagmire, among others. That is pretty well known at this point. But what is less talked about is the sheer recording demand that a season like Season 5 placed on him. He was not just the lead voice actor, he was also the showrunner and one of the primary writers. There were days during the production of Season 5 where Seth MacFarlane would spend hours in the recording booth doing voice work, then transition directly into writing meetings or editing sessions. The creative output required to maintain that level of involvement across an entire season of television is genuinely staggering when you think about it. And the fact that the quality of the show remained as high as it did throughout the season speaks to something remarkable about how that team operated. Okay, here is one that is going to get the real fans excited. The episode called Road to Rupert, which is Season 5, Episode 2, continues the road to tradition that the show had been developing since the Road to Rhode Island episode back in Season 2. These Road to episodes were always treated as special productions within the show. And Road to Rupert was no exception. The episode follows Stewie and Brian on a road trip to Aspen, Colorado to recover Stewie's stuffed animal Rupert, after Peter accidentally sells him at a yard sale. What makes this episode fascinating from a production standpoint is how the writers balanced the comedic elements with genuine character development for Stewie and Brian. The dynamic between those two characters was something the creative team was very deliberately nurturing across this season, laying groundwork for emotional payoffs that would come later. Something worth noting about Family Guy Season 5 that does not get discussed nearly enough is the show's approach to celebrity cameos and references during this period. By Season 5, the show had developed a very specific philosophy about how to use celebrity appearances and references. Rather than simply putting a celebrity in an episode to generate buzz, the writers were much more interested in subverting expectations and using celebrity culture as a target for satire. Some of the references and cameos that appeared throughout Season 5 were planned months in advance with very specific comedic goals in mind. The writer's room for Family Guy was known for being a place where ideas got challenged and stress-tested before they made it onto the screen, and that process really shows in how layered some of the jokes from this season are. Now I want to talk about something that gets into the technical side of animation because I think it adds a whole new dimension to appreciating this season. By the time Season 5 was in production, the animation pipeline for Family Guy had become significantly more sophisticated than it was in the early seasons. The show uses a combination of traditional seal animation techniques and digital tools, and the team had spent years refining how those two approaches could work together. One of the things this allowed them to do in Season 5 was execute cutaway gags with more visual complexity than had been possible earlier in the show's run. Some of the more elaborate fantasy sequences and parody scenes from Season 5 episodes required coordination between multiple animation teams working in parallel, and the results are visible in how polished those moments look, compared to some of the rougher edges you can sometimes see in the earlier seasons. Let me drop another fact that I genuinely did not expect to find. The episode titled No Meals on Wheels is Season 5, Episode 14, and it deals with Peter opening a restaurant called McBurgertown out of the Griffin home. What makes this episode interesting from a behind-the-scenes perspective is that the premise originally went through several completely different versions before arriving at the version that aired. The writing team at Family Guy was known for a process of developing multiple directions for an episode premise before settling on the one that gave them the most comedic and narrative opportunities. The restaurant premise apparently provided so many different comedic avenues that the writers had a difficult time narrowing down which jokes and storylines to prioritize. The version of the episode that ended up airing represents only a fraction of the material that was developed for it. Here is something that connects to a broader truth about how this season worked. Season 5 of Family Guy is notable for how it handled continuity. Now, if you are a long-time viewer of the show, you know that Family Guy is not exactly famous for strict episode-to-episode continuity. Characters age inconsistently, events from one episode are sometimes ignored in others, and the show generally prioritizes the joke over narrative consistency. But Season 5 actually made some deliberate choices about which character developments to carry forward and which ones to treat as isolated incidents. The ongoing development of Stewie's relationship with Brian is the clearest example of this. Across the season, you can trace a through line in how those two characters interact that feels intentional in a way that reflects careful decisions being made in the writer's room about what the show's emotional core should be. All right. I promised you some facts that would genuinely surprise you, so let me get into one that I think is going to land differently than you expect. The Season 5 episode called Peter's Two Dads, which is episode 10, digs into the question of Peter's actual biological father. This episode involves some of the most personal writing in the entire season, according to people who have discussed the creative process around it. The theme of fatherhood and identity is something that resonated with multiple people in the writer's room, and it shows in how the emotional beats of the episode are constructed. There is a sincerity underneath the comedy in that episode that feels different from a lot of Family Guy content, and it is not accidental. The writers were deliberately reaching for something that would connect with viewers on a level beyond just making them laugh. Something that gets overlooked when people talk about Family Guy Season 5 is the role of the supporting cast. Characters like Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire had been part of the show since the beginning, but Season 5 made some specific choices about how to use them that shaped what those characters became going forward. Quagmire in particular was given material in Season 5 that added complexity to a character who had previously been used mostly as a one-note joke delivery vehicle. The writers were testing different versions of who these supporting characters could be, and some of what they found in Season 5 directly influenced the spin-off shows and character-focused episodes that came later. Let me give you a fact about the production timeline that adds some interesting context. When Family Guy Season 5 was being made, the production team was simultaneously dealing with the ongoing development of American Dad, which was Seth MacFarlane's other show on Fox. Managing two animated television series simultaneously is an enormous undertaking, and there were constant decisions being made about which creative resources went where. The fact that Season 5 of Family Guy is as strong as it is when you consider the competing demands on the creative team is genuinely impressive. Some people in the animation industry consider this period to be one of the most productive stretches in the history of Seth MacFarlane's career, precisely because of how much quality work was being produced under those conditions. Here is one that is going to get the internet arguing, which I love. The episode titled Barely Legal, Season 5, Episode 8, is one of the most discussed episodes of the entire season from a content and tone perspective. This episode involves Meg Griffin developing a disturbing obsession with Brian after he takes her to the prom, and it pushed the show into territory that even by Family Guy standards felt transgressive. What is interesting about this episode from a writing perspective is how it handled Meg's character. Meg Griffin has always been the show's punching bag, the character whose misery exists primarily to be laughed at. But Barely Legal, while certainly playing some of those same notes, also gave Meg a kind of desperate emotional honesty that the writers did not typically bring to her storylines. It was a strange combination of uncomfortable comedy and genuine character work, and it is one of the reasons Season 5 feels different from the seasons that came before it. Now, here is something about the music of Season 5 because the music in Family Guy is so much more carefully crafted than most people realize. The show has always had an unusually sophisticated musical component for an animated comedy, and Season 5 elevated this even further. The music team for Family Guy during this period was responsible not just for original compositions, but also for the elaborate parody arrangements that show up throughout the season. When Family Guy takes a well-known piece of music and turns it into a comedic moment, that is not as simple as it sounds. The arrangements have to be close enough to the original to trigger recognition in the viewer, but different enough to serve the comedic purpose of the scene. Getting that balance right requires real musical skill, and the team working on Family Guy Season 5 was exceptionally good at it. I want to circle back to something about Seth MacFarlane that I think adds real depth to your understanding of this season. By Season 5, MacFarlane had developed a very clear philosophy about what Family Guy was supposed to be doing. He was on the record in various interviews during this period talking about the show's relationship to classic Hollywood entertainment, particularly old musicals and the kind of comedy that was popular in the 50s and 60s. MacFarlane genuinely loves that era of entertainment. And his attempt to bring some of those sensibilities into a modern animated show that was simultaneously pushing boundaries with edgy and transgressive humor creates a very specific tension that defines Family Guy at its best. Season 5 is probably the clearest expression of that tension in the entire run of the show. You can watch an episode from Season 5 and see moments of genuine, old-school charm sitting right next to jokes that would have been considered completely untouchable anywhere else on television. Let me throw another interesting production fact at you. The animation of Family Guy is handled by multiple studios, with the primary production handled domestically but significant portions of the actual animation work done overseas, which is standard practice for American animated television. What makes Family Guy interesting in this context is how the creative team maintained quality control across that distributed production process. By Season 5, the oversight systems that had been developed for the show were working extremely well, which is part of why the visual consistency of the season is so high. Some earlier episodes of Family Guy have a slightly inconsistent look between scenes that reflects the challenges of that distributed production model. But by Season 5, those issues had been largely ironed out. Okay, here is one that I find genuinely fascinating from a cultural standpoint. Season 5 of Family Guy aired during a very specific moment in American popular culture. 2006 and 2007 were years when the landscape of television comedy was changing rapidly. Reality television was at the peak of its cultural dominance. The internet was beginning to reshape how people discovered and talked about entertainment, but had not yet fully disrupted the traditional television model. Family Guy existed right at this interesting intersection where it was still primarily a television show in the traditional sense, but was also developing a second life online through clips and discussions that were happening on early video sharing platforms and forums. The writers were aware of this, and it influenced how certain jokes were constructed during Season 5, with some gags designed to be funny in the context of the episode, but also to work as standalone moments that could be shared and repeated. Here is a fact about the writing room that I think every creative person is going to find interesting. Family Guy has always been known for its large writer's room, which is somewhat unusual for an animated show. But many animated comedies operate with smaller creative teams. But Family Guy brought in a significant number of writers who came from very different backgrounds. Some had experience in traditional sitcoms, others came from sketch comedy, some were primarily known for their theatrical writing. This diversity of influences is part of what gives Family Guy its distinctive texture, where you will get a joke that feels like it belongs in a classic sketch comedy show, immediately followed by something that is almost surrealist in its construction. Season 5 is a particularly good example of how that mix of influences produced something genuinely unpredictable. Let me talk about an episode that I think is underrated in discussions of this season. The episode called Hell Comes to Quahog, Season 5, Episode 3, 2, involves a megastore called Superstore USA coming to Quahog and putting Peter out of a job at the shipping company. What makes this episode interesting is how it engages with economic and cultural anxieties about corporate consolidation and the death of small-town commerce. Family Guy was never a show that wore its social commentary on its sleeve the way something like South Park did. But Season 5 in particular has a number of episodes where the satirical underpinning is more coherent and pointed than the show usually attempted. Hell Comes to Quahog is a good example of this. There is a real idea at the center of that episode that the comedy grows out of rather than simply existing alongside. Something I want to make sure we talk about is the character of Stewie Griffin and how Season 5 handled him specifically. Stewie had gone through some evolution between the early seasons and Season 5. In the early episodes, Stewie was primarily a one-note joke machine, built around the premise of an evil baby with world domination plans. By Season 5, the writers had moved away from that somewhat, developing Stewie as a more emotionally complex character with a specific and strange relationship to his own identity. Season 5 pushed this even further. And you can see the seeds of some of the most interesting Stewie storylines from later in the show's run being planted here. The writers were clearly interested in exploring what happened when you took this character who had been defined by one particular joke and asked deeper questions about who he actually was. Alright, here's a random fact that I love purely for how absurd it is. The amount of research that goes into Family Guy's historical and pop culture references is genuinely significant. The writer's room maintained extensive files of reference material that writers could draw on when constructing jokes. Some of the most obscure references that show up in Season 5 episodes required real research to get right, because the joke only works if the detail is accurate. There is a specific kind of comedy that Family Guy does where the humor comes partly from the specificity of the reference, and that specificity requires someone in the room to actually know their stuff. By Season 5, the research infrastructure that supported that kind of joke had become quite well developed. Let me give you something that connects the dots between Season 5 and the broader legacy of the show. Season 5 of Family Guy is frequently cited by fans and critics as one of the high points of the entire series run. If you look at ratings data and critical discussions from that period, you can see that the show was operating at a level of cultural relevance during Season 5 that it has struggled to consistently recapture since. Part of this is simply the nature of long-running television shows, which tend to have a peak creative period and then find themselves in the difficult position of trying to maintain quality while the creative team exhausts their best ideas. But part of it is also that Season 5 represented a very specific confluence of factors that was difficult to replicate. The creative team was firing on all cylinders. The show had the benefit of having come back from cancellation and was motivated to prove itself. And the cultural moment was exactly right for what Family Guy was doing. Here is one more production fact that I think you will find surprising. The sound design on Family Guy is something that gets almost no attention in discussions of the show, but it is absolutely crucial to how the comedy works. The specific choices about sound effects, the timing of audio cues, and the way music is used to punctuate jokes all contribute enormously to whether a given moment is actually funny or falls flat. The sound team for Family Guy during Season 5 had developed an extremely precise vocabulary for how to use sound to maximize comedic impact. Some of the most satisfying moments from Season 5 episodes, the ones where a joke just lands perfectly, owe as much to the sound design choices as to the writing or the performance. Now I want to get into something that touches on the show's relationship with its own continuity and mythology in a way that I think is genuinely interesting. Season 5 contains several episodes that function as what you might call mythology-building episodes, where the writers were laying foundations for aspects of the Family Guy universe that would be explored more deeply later. The two-part Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie storyline is the most obvious example, but there are subtler instances throughout the season where the writers were clearly thinking about the long game for specific characters and storylines. This kind of forward thinking was somewhat unusual for a show that had traditionally operated on a much more episodic basis, and it reflects the growing ambition of the creative team as they settled into their position as one of the most important shows on Fox's animation block. Let me drop one more fact that I think will genuinely surprise some of you. The table reads for Family Guy episodes, which are the initial read-throughs of scripts with the full cast, were known to be quite lengthy and involved. Scripts would frequently be significantly altered between the table read and the final recorded version based on what worked and what did not work when the words were actually being spoken aloud by the actors. Season 5 in particular went through significant rewrites at the table read stage for several episodes. Some jokes that made it through the writing process were cut entirely during table reads because they did not land the way the writers expected, and some moments that became iconic in the final versions were actually added during or after table reads because an actor's delivery of something improvised or slightly adjusted was funnier than what had originally been written. There is something I want to say about Brian Griffin specifically because Brian is one of the most interesting characters in Season 5. Brian is the show's self-insert intellectual, the character who allows the writers to engage with ideas about culture, literature, and identity in a way that would feel out of place coming from Peter or Stewie. Season 5 used Brian in ways that were more emotionally honest than the show had previously attempted, giving him storylines that interrogated his pretensions and his failures in a way that was simultaneously comedic and a little bit sad. The writers were clearly interested in using Brian to explore something about the particular kind of person who considers himself more enlightened than the people around him, but consistently fails to live up to his own ideals. That is rich comedic and dramatic territory, and Season 5 dug into it with real commitment. Here is a fascinating detail about how specific episodes from Season 5 were marketed and promoted. Fox's promotional strategy for Family Guy during this period was very much focused on the edgier and more provocative elements of the show, because those were the aspects that generated the most discussion and controversy. But what is interesting is that some of the promotional material for Season 5 episodes actually undersold what those episodes were doing creatively. Some of the most technically and emotionally ambitious work in the season was packaged as straightforward shock comedy in promotional materials, which meant that some viewers came in expecting one thing and got something considerably more interesting. This disconnect between how the show was marketed and what it was actually doing is part of what makes Season 5 such an interesting object of study. I want to wrap this up by zooming out and talking about what Season 5 of Family Guy means in the larger picture of animated television. The show arrived back from cancellation with something to prove, and Season 5 represents the fullest expression of what it proved. It demonstrated that an animated comedy for adults could sustain a level of creative ambition over an entire season, could balance outrageous comedy with genuine character work, could be both proudly lowbrow and surprisingly sophisticated within the same episode, or even the same scene. That combination is genuinely difficult to pull off, and Family Guy Season 5 pulled it off more consistently than almost any other season of the show. The people who made this season were working at the intersection of enormous commercial pressure, genuine creative ambition, and the very specific freedom that comes from knowing your audience trusts you. No. Every one of these facts we have talked about today points to the same underlying truth, which is that the thing you watched and laughed at and quoted to your friends was the result of an enormous amount of careful, deliberate creative work. The jokes that seemed thrown off and random were usually the product of long discussions and multiple rewrites. The character moments that hit you somewhere unexpected were the result of writers who understood those characters deeply enough to find the genuine emotion underneath the comedy. That is what makes Family Guy Season 5 worth going back to and worth thinking about seriously. Not just as a collection of funny moments, though it absolutely is that, but as the work of a group of genuinely talented people who were operating at the peak of their abilities and who produced something that has stayed in the cultural conversation for almost 2 decades since it first aired. The next time you sit down to watch one of these episodes, I want you to keep some of these facts in your head. Notice the sound design. Pay attention to how the musical moments are constructed. Think about the balance between the shock comedy and the genuine character work. Hey, you are going to see this season completely differently, and honestly, that feels like exactly the right reward for going down this particular rabbit hole together. If you made it to the end of this, first of all, thank you, because this was a deep one. If you are a Family Guy fan who has been waiting for someone to take this show seriously enough to actually dig into what makes it work, I hope this delivered for you. Drop in the comments what your favorite Season 5 episode is, because I want to know. And I have very strong opinions about this that I will absolutely argue with you about. Make sure you subscribe because we do this kind of thing regularly, and there is a lot more to come. Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. And today we are diving deep into one of the most underrated seasons of one of the most beloved animated shows ever made. I am talking about Family Guy Season 9, and I have gathered together some of the most fascinating, bizarre, and genuinely surprising facts about this particular season that I think even the most hardcore fans out there might not know. So whether you have been watching Family Guy since the very beginning or you just discovered it recently, stick around, because this video is going to be packed with stuff that will genuinely change how you watch these episodes. We are going to be covering everything from behind-the-scenes production secrets, to wild casting choices, to moments that almost got cut from the show entirely. Trust me. Hey, by the end of this video, you're going to want to go back and re-watch the entire season with completely fresh eyes. So without any further delay, let us get right into it. Alright, so first things first, let us just set the stage here. Family Guy. Season 9 aired in 2010 and 2011, and it came at a really interesting point in the show's history. This was a season where the writers were clearly pushing boundaries in ways they had not quite pushed before, and the results were sometimes controversial, sometimes absolutely hilarious, and sometimes genuinely emotional in ways that caught audiences completely off guard. The show had already been canceled and brought back before this point, and there was this energy in the writing room where it felt like nothing was off limits. And that attitude absolutely shows in the episodes we got during this run. Now, the very first fact I want to drop on you today is about the season premiere itself. The episode that kicked off Season 9 is called And Then There Were Fewer. And this episode is genuinely remarkable for a number of reasons that go way beyond just being a good episode of television. This was actually the first episode of Family Guy to be animated entirely in high definition from the ground up. Previous seasons had made the transition to widescreen and HD presentation, but this particular premiere was treated like a cinematic event by the production team. Or, the scope of the episode, the visual ambition, the runtime, all of it was designed to signal to audiences that something different was happening. The episode ran significantly longer than a typical Family Guy episode and was presented almost like a feature film in miniature. The production team reportedly put an enormous amount of extra effort into the backgrounds, the lighting, the character animation, all of these details that you might not consciously notice, but that subconsciously make everything feel more expensive and more cinematic. And here is what makes that even more interesting. The episode itself is structured as a murder mystery parody, drawing heavily from classic Agatha Christie-style whodunit storytelling. The entire Griffin family and a large cast of Quahog residents get invited to a mysterious mansion, and then characters start getting picked off one by one. Now, what is fascinating about this from a production standpoint is that the writers had to actually plot out a coherent mystery with real clues and a real solution that made logical sense. That is not something Family Guy typically concerns itself with. The show is famously disconnected from continuity and logical consistency, so the fact that the writing team sat down and constructed an actual mystery narrative with proper setup and payoff was a genuinely different kind of creative challenge for them. And reportedly, the writers found it really refreshing to work within that kind of structural constraint for once. Okay, so moving on, let us talk about one of the most talked about episodes of this entire season, which is Quagmire's dad. Now, if you have watched this episode, you know exactly why it generated so much conversation when it aired. This episode deals with Glenn Quagmire discovering that his father, a decorated military veteran, is transgender and has decided to transition. Now, the way Family Guy handles this topic is complicated, and definitely not without controversy. There were viewers and critics who felt the episode handled the subject matter in a mean-spirited way. And there were others who argued that the show was actually doing something relatively progressive for its time by introducing a transgender character in a prominent storyline at all. What is interesting from a factual standpoint is that the voice cast had to approach this material in a way they had not really been asked to approach anything before on the show. The emotional beats in that episode, particularly the scenes between Quagmire and his father, required a kind of sincerity that Family Guy does not always traffic in. The creative team made a deliberate decision to treat certain moments in that episode with genuine emotional weight, rather than just playing everything for laughs. And speaking of voice casting, here is a fact that I absolutely love. Season 9 contains one of the most impressive concentrations of celebrity guest voices in the show's entire run-up to that point. The season premiere alone featured an enormous number of famous voices coming in to play characters who were essentially there to be killed off. Think about that from a logistical standpoint. You have to convince recognizable celebrities to come in, record their lines, and essentially play characters whose entire purpose is to die during the episode. That requires a particular kind of sport about you as a performer. And the fact that so many people were willing to do it says a lot about how highly regarded Family Guy was in the entertainment industry at that time. Now let us shift gears a little bit and talk about Brian and Stewie, which is arguably the most critically acclaimed episode not just of Season 9, but potentially in the entire history of the show. And I want to spend some real time on this one because the facts surrounding this episode are genuinely incredible. So Brian and Stewie is remarkable first and foremost because of its structure. The entire episode takes place in real time, in a single location, with only two characters. Brian and Stewie get accidentally locked inside a bank vault over the weekend, and the entire episode is just these two characters talking. There are no cutaway gags. There are no other storylines happening simultaneously. There is no B-plot, no C-plot, nothing. Just two characters in a room for the entirety of the episode's runtime. Now, for a show like Family Guy, which has essentially built its entire comedic identity around rapid-fire cutaways and non-sequitur jokes and constant tonal shifts, choosing to do an episode that strips all of that away is an absolutely audacious creative decision. And what makes it even more audacious is that it works. The episode received genuinely glowing reviews from critics who had spent years dismissing Family Guy as lowbrow entertainment. Suddenly, there were television writers and critics treating this episode like a serious piece of drama. And that reaction surprised even some people who worked on the show. Here is a fascinating behind-the-scenes detail about Brian and Stewie. The episode was actually a passion project for Seth MacFarlane, who voices both Brian and Stewie among other characters. MacFarlane was reportedly very personally invested in exploring the deeper emotional dynamics between these two characters, particularly the complicated relationship that Stewie has with Brian as a kind of father figure / best friend. The episode goes to some genuinely dark places emotionally, including a moment where Stewie admits to having something like genuine suicidal ideation, and Brian is forced to take that seriously rather than just dismissing it as typical Stewie melodrama. These are not easy emotional territories to navigate, and the fact that the show went there and handled it with a fair amount of care is something that a lot of people who worked on that episode are rightfully proud of. The episode also became notable because Seth MacFarlane had to essentially perform a two-person play, essentially by himself. He had to do his Brian voice and his Stewie voice and create the dynamic of a real conversation between these two personalities. And a lot of that work was done with great attention to the rhythm and pacing of the dialogue. Reportedly, the writing process for this episode was significantly more laborious than a typical Family Guy episode precisely because there was nowhere to hide. In a normal episode, if one joke does not land, you are already on to the next cutaway. In this episode, every single exchange between the two characters had to be compelling enough to justify its existence. Now I want to talk about another episode that generated a huge amount of discussion during this season, and that is the episode called Go, Stewie, Go, which involves Stewie disguising himself as a girl to get onto a children's television program. This episode is notable for a couple of reasons beyond just its comedic premise. It draws from a really classic tradition of gender disguise comedy that goes all the way back to Shakespeare and runs through movies like Some Like It Hot and Tootsie. The writers were very consciously playing with that tradition and putting their own particular Family Guy spin on it. But what is interesting is that this episode also contains some surprisingly thoughtful moments about identity and performance that go a little deeper than you might expect from what sounds like a straightforward comedic premise. The episode also features a storyline involving Meg and Brian that was somewhat controversial among fans. The Brian and Meg dynamic in this episode raised eyebrows because it pushed the boundaries of what fans were comfortable seeing from these characters. The writers were clearly aware they were playing with fire in terms of audience expectations, and the episode has remained one of the more debated installments of this particular season among the fan community. All right, so let us talk about the musical elements of Season 9. because Family Guy has always incorporated original songs into its episodes, and Season 9 is no exception. What a lot of people do not realize is the sheer amount of original music composition that goes into each season of this show. Every original song that appears in a Family Guy episode has to be written, composed, arranged, recorded, and then animated too. That is an enormous amount of creative and logistical work that often goes unacknowledged. The musical team working on Family Guy during this period was genuinely talented, and the songs produced during Season 9 are some of the catchiest and most technically accomplished in the show's run. Seth MacFarlane himself is genuinely accomplished as a singer and performer, and his love of classic American songbook-style music and Broadway-style composition shows up consistently throughout the show. MacFarlane actually has a real background in musical theater, and he has talked in interviews about how he views the musical sequences in Family Guy as some of the most personally satisfying work he does on the show. The production pipeline for these musical sequences is incredibly complex because the animation has to be synchronized to music that has already been recorded, which requires a completely different approach to the animation process than the dialogue-driven scenes. Now, here is something that I think is genuinely fascinating from a pure production nerd standpoint. Family Guy during this period was being produced simultaneously with American Dad and The Cleveland Show, both of which were also Seth MacFarlane productions on Fox. The amount of content that was being produced under that creative umbrella at any given point during Season 9 is genuinely staggering when you think about it. MacFarlane and his team were essentially running 3 separate animated television series at the same time, each with its own writing staff, its own animation pipeline, its own voice recording schedule. The logistical complexity of keeping all 3 shows running at a high-quality level simultaneously is something that very few people in television history have ever attempted. And what is interesting is that Season 9 of Family Guy was being produced during a period where the creative team was very aware of the competition they were facing from other animated shows. The Simpsons had been on the air for over 2 decades by this point. South Park was continuing to do incredibly bold and timely storytelling. Bob's Burgers was just about to launch and would eventually become a major competitor in the animated comedy space. The Family Guy writing room during this period was very conscious of needing to carve out what made their show distinctly itself, rather than just trying to imitate what was working elsewhere. Let us talk about the episode called The Splendid Source, which is the season finale of Season 9. This episode involves Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe going on an adventure to track down the origin of a dirty joke, which takes them across the country and eventually to some genuinely unexpected places. What is interesting about this episode as a season finale is that it is almost defiantly unserious. A lot of shows use their season finales to deliver emotional payoffs, to resolve ongoing storylines, to give audiences a sense of conclusion. Family Guy instead chose to end their 9th season with what is essentially a road trip adventure built around a profoundly juvenile premise. And I think that actually tells you something important about the show's philosophy and its relationship with its audience. The episode also reflects something that the show does really well, which is using its ensemble of male characters to explore a certain kind of bro-friendship dynamic. Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe are in many ways a classic comedic friend group archetype, and the show at its best understands exactly how to use those character dynamics to generate comedy. The road trip format allows each character's distinct personality to bump up against the others in entertaining ways, and the season finale delivered on that premise in a way that left audiences reasonably satisfied going into the hiatus. Now, I want to share some facts about the writing process for Season 9 specifically, because I think the behind-the-scenes details of how these episodes get made are genuinely fascinating and underappreciated. Family Guy, like most American animated comedies of its type, uses a writer's room format where multiple writers contribute to each episode. But unlike a live-action show, the writing of a Family Guy episode has to account for the specific requirements of animation production, which has a much longer lead time than live-action television. By the time an episode is actually airing on Fox, the writing and recording and animation for that episode could have been completed anywhere from 6 months to over a year earlier. This creates a really interesting challenge when it comes to topical humor or references to current events, because the writers have to make educated guesses about what will still be funny or relevant by the time audiences actually see the material. Season 9 was produced during a very specific cultural moment, roughly around 2009 and 2010 when it was in production. And you can see the cultural fingerprints of that era throughout the season's humor and references. Some of those references have aged better than others, which is something that is just an unavoidable reality of comedy that engages with contemporary culture. Here is another fact that I think is really interesting. The character development that happened across Season 9 continued a gradual evolution in how certain characters were being written. Meg Griffin in particular received some genuinely sympathetic treatment during this season. The show had always used Meg as a punching bag, a character who existed largely to be the butt of jokes and to be mistreated by her family and peers. But in certain episodes during Season 9, the writers clearly made an effort to give Meg actual moments of dignity and characterization that went beyond her usual role. This was part of a longer arc in the show's history of occasionally examining what it actually means to consistently treat a character as worthless, and whether there is something genuinely uncomfortable about that joke structure. The voice actress Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg since very early in the show's run, has talked about what it is like to voice a character who is treated so poorly by her own family. And there is something genuinely interesting about the way Kunis brings a kind of weary sincerity to the role that makes Meg's suffering land differently than pure comedy. The best Meg moments in Season 9 take advantage of that quality in Kunis's performance. Now let us talk about the episode called And I'm Joyce Kinney, which involves Lois's past coming back to haunt her when a local news anchor reveals a compromising piece of Lois's history. This episode is notable because it deals with themes of shame, public humiliation, and the way communities and social groups can be incredibly cruel to people who they perceive as having violated social norms. The fact that this episode uses comedy to explore those themes does not make the underlying ideas any less pointed. Family Guy, at its best, has always been able to use its absurdist humor as a delivery mechanism for observations about human nature that are actually pretty incisive. The episode also features some interesting material about organized religion and the way religious communities can be quick to judge and slow to extend grace, which is territory the show has visited before, but which is handled with reasonable effectiveness here. Lois's relationship with her faith and her community is tested in ways that feel dramatically genuine, even within the context of an animated comedy. All right, let us get into some pure trivia territory for a moment because I know some of you are here for the quick hit facts and I want to make sure we are delivering on that. Did you know that Season 9 of Family Guy was the first season to fully embrace a more cinematic approach to background art? The production team made a concerted effort during this season to make the environments and backgrounds of Quahog feel more detailed and three-dimensional than they had in previous seasons. This might sound like a small technical detail, but it actually has a significant impact on how the show looks and feels. More detailed backgrounds make the show look more expensive and more professionally crafted, and they give the animators more interesting visual environments to work with. Another piece of trivia worth knowing is that several of the guest voices in Season 9 were longtime fans of the show who specifically requested to appear. There is something really charming about the idea of famous performers being genuine fans of Family Guy and wanting to be part of it, even if it meant playing a relatively minor character or literally being killed off in the season premiere. The episode titled New Kidney in Town deserves some attention here because it is one of the more emotionally ambitious episodes of the season. This episode involves Brian developing a dangerous health condition related to his coffee drinking habits, and the family having to confront the possibility of actually losing Brian. Now, in the context of Family Guy, where nothing is ever permanent and no consequences ever really stick, an episode that asks you to emotionally invest in the potential death of a beloved character is asking quite a lot of its audience. And what is interesting is that the show manages to generate genuine emotional tension, even while everyone watching knows on some level that Brian is not actually going to die. This kind of dramatic stakes-raising within a consequence-free comedic universe is actually a really sophisticated storytelling technique when it is done right. You create genuine emotional engagement not because the audience actually believes the character will die, but because the episode forces you to reckon with what it would feel like if they did. And in doing so, the episode actually deepens the audience's emotional connection to the character and to the show. Brian and Stewie earlier in the season did something similar, and the fact that Season 9 contains multiple episodes that play with this kind of emotional investment suggests that the writing team was consciously trying to deepen the show's emotional range during this period. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the critical reception to Season 9 as a whole, because I think it is instructive about where Family Guy stood in the cultural conversation at this point in its history. The season received genuinely mixed reviews from critics. There were critics who felt that the show was continuing to rely too heavily on shock humor and cutaway gags at the expense of genuine storytelling. There were others who pointed to episodes like Brian and Stewie as evidence that the show was capable of genuine creative ambition when it chose to apply itself. And then there was a large portion of the critical community that had essentially checked out of thinking seriously about Family Guy as anything other than a populist entertainment product that served its audience well enough without particularly challenging anyone. What is interesting about that critical landscape is that it completely ignored the fact that Family Guy was genuinely one of the most watched shows on American television during this period. The audience numbers were consistently enormous. The show had a passionate and deeply devoted fan base that engaged with it in ways that went far beyond casual viewership. Family Guy merchandise, fan art, fan communities, online discussion. All of these were flourishing in ways that spoke to a genuine cultural resonance that no amount of critical dismissal could change. The season also benefits from a really strong supporting cast of recurring Quahog characters. Mayor Adam West, played by the legendary Adam West himself, continued to be a reliably hilarious presence. The Quagmire character continued to be developed in interesting directions that complicated his initial characterization as a pure comedic sleazeball. Cleveland's departure for his own spin-off show had happened by this point, which changed the dynamic of the core friend group somewhat, but the show adapted well to that absence. Here is a fact that I find genuinely delightful. The title cards and episode naming conventions in Season 9 continue a tradition within Family Guy of choosing episode titles that are either extremely descriptive of their content or deliberately cryptic or sometimes just funny as standalone phrases. The writers have always put real thought into episode titles, and the Season 9 titles are particularly strong as a collection. There is a craft to titling a television episode that is easy to overlook. But a great episode title does real work in terms of setting audience expectations and creating intrigue before anyone has even watched a single frame of content. Now let us talk about the animation quality in Season 9 more specifically, because I think this is an area where the season really distinguished itself. The transition to HD production gave the animation team an opportunity to push what was possible in terms of visual complexity and detail. Action sequences became more dynamic. Character expressions became more nuanced. The visual comedy, which has always been an important component of Family Guy's humor, became sharper and more precisely executed. The animation team during this period was clearly motivated by the new technical possibilities available to them, and the results show on screen in ways that are genuinely impressive if you pay attention to the craft. One area where this improvement is particularly noticeable is in the physical comedy sequences. Family Guy has always loved elaborate physical comedy set pieces, and Season 9 contains some particularly well-constructed examples of this. The timing and staging of these sequences reflects a real understanding of how physical comedy works visually, and the higher production values allowed the animation team to execute on the jokes with greater precision than ever before. Let me share one more genuinely fascinating production fact before we start wrapping up. The writing staff for Season 9 included a number of writers who had come from other major comedy programs and brought with them very different sensibilities and influences. Family Guy has always benefited from having a diverse writing room in terms of comedic influences and backgrounds, and Season 9 in particular reflects a real mix of tones and approaches that gives the season a certain unpredictability. You genuinely never know from one episode to the next whether you are going to get a deeply heartfelt character study like Brian and Stewie, or a completely absurdist romp or a sharp satirical take on contemporary culture. That unpredictability is actually one of the things that keeps audiences engaged even after a show has been on the air for a significant number of years. The season also featured some genuinely memorable Stewie moments beyond the vault episode. Stewie's character has one of the most interesting trajectories in the show's history, having started as an explicitly evil baby with a world domination plans, and gradually evolved into something more complex, more sympathetic, and more genuinely funny in a character-driven way rather than a concept-driven way. Season 9 continues that evolution in some interesting directions. Griffin, Peter and Lois's older son, also gets some moments in Season 9 that showcase what the character can do when the writers give him actual material to work with. Chris is sometimes overlooked in discussions of the show's character work because he does not have the rich inner life of Brian or the theatrical villainy of Stewie. But at his best, Chris represents a particular kind of sweet, confused adolescent experience that is actually quite relatable. And Peter Griffin himself remains one of American animated television's greatest comedic creations throughout Season 9. What makes Peter enduringly funny and interesting is that he is simultaneously completely terrible in many ways, and somehow lovable and even sympathetic in others. The writers walk a genuinely difficult tonal line with Peter, making him selfish and oblivious, and often actively harmful, while also ensuring that audiences never entirely stop rooting for him or caring about him. Season 9 finds some really interesting ways to use that tension. So as we bring this all together, what does Season 9 tell us about Family Guy as a creative enterprise? I think it tells us that this is a show that genuinely thrives in contradiction. It is simultaneously one of the most popular and one of the most critically divisive shows in American television history. It can produce an episode as artistically ambitious as Brian and Stewie in the same season as episodes that are purely, unapologetically, gloriously juvenile. It can handle sensitive social topics with surprising nuance in one moment and then completely abandon nuance in the next. And somehow, all of these contradictions coexist within the identity of a single show without destroying it. Season 9 is a fascinating case study in what it looks like when a creative team is genuinely trying to push beyond their own established formula, while also being deeply loyal to what their audience loves about their show. The results are not always perfect. Some episodes work better than others. Some creative risks land and some do not. But the ambition is evident throughout. And that ambition is what makes Season 9 worth revisiting and worth studying as a piece of television history. All right, everyone. That is going to do it for today's deep dive into Family Guy Season 9. I genuinely hope that some of these facts were new to you and that they give you a richer appreciation for what this season accomplished. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button because it genuinely makes a massive difference in terms of getting this content in front of more people who would enjoy it. If you want to see more videos like this one, make sure you are subscribed and you have that notification bell turned on so you never miss an upload. I put a lot of time and love into these deep dive videos, and the support from this community means everything. So, drop your favorite Season 9 episode down in the comments below. I am genuinely curious what you all think the standout episode of that season was, and let me know if there are any other seasons or shows you want me to cover in future videos. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. That means the world to me, and I will see you in the next one.